Oh, here I am and my dog outside barking. It is Sunday, May 24th at noon, Chicago time, Central time, whatever you want to call it. I am Jax West, and I am from on Facebook, Stephen Avery Project, MAM Gossip, and Justice with Jax. I also run the free marnieyang.com. And I'm here today to read another installment from my book that you can get on Amazon, Wrongfully Abused, Making an Advocate for Stephen Avery by me, Jax West. Um, I wrote that I published it in 2022, and it is on my experience of being an advocate for Stephen Avery from the Netflix docuseries Making a Murderer. Hi, Bryce. Yeah, so this was a spur of the moment. My husband made me a lovely breakfast and I was watching TV. And then I'm like, I haven't been live for a while, so maybe I'll schedule something. As here in the States, it is a holiday weekend, it is Memorial Day weekend. I don't have work tomorrow, but I'll basically be gone all day because I'm going to go down to Logan Correctional and visit Melissa Kaluzinski. I am a state employee, so I get state holidays off. So since I was off work, it's like, okay, I'll go down to the prison. So I'm going to go visit Melissa tomorrow. Before I start reading my book, I wanted to give you all a scoop on my messages with Stephen Avery this week. Um, I texted him because I haven't heard from him in a while. And so I just wanted to do a check in and to find out if he has seen his dad. Because the last time I did a live, I think I did a live on the Facebook Stephen Avery Project. And that's when I go live over there, that's when I get the most people too. I mean, there's 1,000 followers here on YouTube, but they don't typically come here when I'm doing a live. But when I am live on Facebook, there's more traffic there. But I'm trying to do my videos here instead of Facebook because Facebook only allows the videos to remain on the page for 30 days and then they delete it. So it was Christopher, duh. So I had been doing the live video still on Facebook. And then I was uploading those to my computer and then downloading them here to YouTube. And it's like, duh, why don't I just do it here and then get the link and post it? So even though I don't get as many views or whatever, it is just easier to start here first. So, but when I go live on Facebook on Stephen Avery Project, Stephen's brother, Chuck, will pop in. And so the last time I was live over there, and those videos are uploaded here, so you can find them in the Stephen Avery case folder here. But Chuck commented and said that that weekend he was going to be bringing his dad to visit Stephen. And that has been a big thing going that, they kept Stephen's mother from him for the last year of her life, and now they're keeping his father. And so it dawned on me on Friday, I think it was, that, I haven't heard from Stephen, so I wanted to check in and go, hey, how are you doing? Do you need anything? And have you seen your dad? And his response to me was, no, still haven't seen his dad because his brother Earl is blocking it. Earl is doing some severe elder abuse there. And so the latest scam that Earl Avery is doing is when you go visit a prison, you have to bring your driver's license or a picture or a state ID. I don't think it can just be a picture ID. Like I have my FOID card. I don't think they would accept my FOID card. But um, So you have to give your license or your state ID in order to get into the prison, and so apparently Earl has taken Ellen's. So even though Earl's not put out at all to for Ellen to go visit Steven. Nobody's asking him to do the drive. Nobody's asking him to put money on Steven's books. Nobody's asking him to do anything. The other brother, Chuck, who is the oldest, has said that he would bring Ellen to go visit Steven. Earl is still blocking it. Um, how horrible is that? To keep his father from him after you kept his mother from him. His mother and his cousin, Kim Ducat, are the only 2 family members that have been with Stephen the entire time, that they never wavered on guilt or innocence, and that they always supported Stephen, period. When you've had other family members who go back and forth depending on what's going to get them attention and money. Dolores and Kim are the only 2 who have backed Stephen, and Dolores was taken from him the last year of her life. Now, Dolores was taken, period, because she had dementia, so, that's just sad in itself. Um But Stephen wasn't given the respect to be able to speak to her. You know, it had been said that, she didn't know how to use a phone or didn't know who Stephen was, all these excuses to try and make it out like Stephen was the problem in this, but we don't know, first of all, because the family's a bunch of liars. Um, and even if Dolores wasn't able to communicate that she remembered Stephen, we don't know what it's like to be locked in a brain that has dementia, um, and what might happen in there that then you can't get out. And so it could have benefited Dolores as well as it would have benefited Stephen to just be able to say things to his mother on a speakerphone, saying, "I love you, I miss you," all of that. So that was taken from him, and now Earl is doing this with their father, Alan. Um, so I don't know what's happening there. I have offered my assistance, of course, so stay tuned on that. I will update you all when I know anything else or anything that I can tell you. And then I'm visiting Melissa Kaluzinski tomorrow. Melissa is in a bad place right now mentally. Um, her parents visited her last weekend and she told me she like sobbed. Melissa doesn't typically cry, but things are just overwhelming to her right now. So, and that's another reason why it's like, all right, I'll do what I can to schedule a visit because it's very hard with my job that right now one of my office staff resigned, she retired, and I'm looking for a new office staff, but until I get somebody, I have to, man the office Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 4:30, so I can't take a weekday off, and that's typically when I like to go down to the prison. I don't want to go on a weekend because the weekends are the only time her parents can go, and her parents and I are the only people that really visit her, and so I would prefer to do a weekday, but I can't take any days off right now. And I have 6 interns starting on Tuesday that I have to onboard and train and get them all ready to go. So, holiday weekend, it's a 2.5 hour drive for me. So, 2.5 hour drive down, a 4 hour visit, and then a 2.5 hour drive back. So, so basically a day of work on my day off. But Um, if anything happens in Melissa's case, I will update you on that. Then, of course, there's the Marnie Yang case that we have the judge keeps pushing off his ruling, and right now it's scheduled for the end of June. So, and I have that day scheduled off work, and if I don't have office staff that day, then my boss is going to have to do the office, or the office is going to have to be closed because I am not, um, missing her court date for the judge to, give his decision. Alright, so let's get into my book. I'm gonna read for, like, an hour, depending on where, um where we're at in the book and how I'm feeling and if I wanna keep going, but I like to try to make these only an hour because people don't wanna sit on here for longer, and also noticed when I started reading this to you all, when I published it, there are no page numbers, so I can't tell you what page number I'm on because I don't know why there's no page numbers. I could swear when I wrote it, I put page numbers, but whatever. So, where were we? Let me put some glasses on. Um, what are we reading here? I'm going back to try and see what chapter at least. Trials, hearings, and filings. So we're like in the middle of that. We are, looks like a little bit over than halfway through the book. And I'm just going to start at the top of the left side. All right. Page 71 says that 4 months after the police had the RAV4, they began looking at the hood latch. Fassbender and Wiegert first brought up while interrogating Brendan on March 1 and asking him if Stephen ever looked at the engine, etc. Brendan said no. But then on March 13th, after being pressured by Fassbender and Wiegert, Brendan changed his story to fit their narrative. The hood latch was then swabbed for evidence on April 3rd. They only swabbed the interior latch, not the interior latch that he would have had to use as well. They also broke the chain of custody in this comedy of errors. Kathleen contends that since they weren't supposed to take groin swabs, the nurse never noted doing it, concealing throwing them away. The chain of custody screws up, all alludes to them doing this to plant the evidence. Page 7. Can I turn my fan on? I don't know if it's going to be too loud and annoying, but it's a warm day today and I'm getting warm. So let me know, anybody who's on here live, if this fan noise is annoying. Page 74 says they were on the hunt for the sweat on the hood latch. They conducted experiments on an identical vehicle. In 11 of the 15 experiments, no detectable DNA was present on the swab. The remaining ones had a teeny tiny bit. An expert said the law enforcement lab did everything below acceptable standards of practice. They also didn't photograph any of the alleged bones in the burn pit. They confused where the burn barrels were and messed up the chain of custody on those as well. Any photos that were taken had the area of interest obscured by the shadows of investigators. Some remains were found outside the pit. No large bones were found at all. There was nothing on what fueled the fire except tires. Many of the bone fragments were coated with a yellow or tan dust. Dr. Eisenberg said she rinsed some bones. Based on Kathleen's expert's experience, the bones could only be burned like they were when confined by a metal enclosure. The expert contends that the body was burned in a field cremation involving a sustained and restoked fire over a period of time. The bigger portions, like the base of the skull, shoulders, or pelvis, would only be charred after 4 to 7 hours in a fire. They remain their shape unless mechanically stirred. To achieve what these bones were reduced to, they would have to be in a fire for much longer. Kathleen's expert does not think the body was burned behind Stephen's garage. He says someone transferred the bones there. It was consistent to someone dumping them there and then some rolling away. The state claimed Teresa was burned in the open pit from 7 to 11 p.m. Kathleen's expert says that is not supported by the evidence. The burned bench seat was not found in the burn pit, but near it. As for the tire belts being burned onto some of the bones, the dog's chain was long enough to reach the pit, and it could very well have dragged some of the fragments into the fire. Page 86 says Teresa's electronics weren't found in the first searches. Kratz is who was directing the search of the burn barrels. He knew they weren't in the barrels in the initial searches, but then all of a sudden they were on November 7th. Kratz pressured Fabian into committing perjury because Kratz needed to link Stephen to those items. Fabian was the only witness they had. Fabian claimed he smelled burning plastic and saw thick smoke on October 31 as he and Earl Avery were driving a golf cart around at 5:20 p.m. Kathleen's expert burned identical items and there was no burning plastic odor, nor was there heavy smoke. Things get personal on page 97. I know people don't want to hear anything negative about the victim, but the fact remains it is important to know their life to identify possible suspects. Oh, looking at myself in the screen here, I wonder if this will bring more boys to the yard because it looks like I'm topless, but I am not. I am in a tube top or strapless top. Ta-da! I didn't even think of that I would be looking like I was naked on here. So bring on the more followers. Kathleen has evidence that Teresa and Ryan's relationship was abusive. She was also in a relationship with a married man that she met when she was photographing him and his wife naked. Her affair caused a breakup of the marriage. She was also having sex with her roommate, who was friends with her abusive ex, but none of these people were looked at. Ryan knew Teresa's password to her voicemail and deleted messages so her box wouldn't be full and tip people off that she was missing. Teresa's phone records show the last time she accessed her voicemail from her own phone was at 2:12 p.m. on October 31. Ryan planned to burn the body and plant the evidence at Stevens because he knew she had an appointment with him from the paperwork in the RAV4. He volunteered to control the search party, so he would also control the focus of the investigation. He did not initially tell the police his relationship to Teresa. Page 102 mentions Ryan having a medical background, as it describes how Ryan went to the yard to plant the vehicle and body there. He went into Stephen's trailer to find something that would have his DNA on it. Then he noticed the blood in the sink. He couldn't hide the car there on his first attempt. He went back on November 4 with an accomplice that drove another vehicle through the quarry and parked the RAV4 on the southeast corner by the pond. He then took law enforcement back there that night and offered to search for them since they couldn't without a warrant. He looked in the vehicle and then said, "It's hers." Ryan then helped the police justify planting evidence to frame Avery. Ryan had access to the yard since he was part of the search party to plant bones and electrical devices. No one had seen a broken parking light on Teresa's car on that last day, but when it was found, it had damage. The broken light was put in the cargo area of her car. Ryan damaged it, but had to pick up all the pieces so it wouldn't be known where the vehicle had driven and that it had left the yard. He had first attempted to hide the car near Stephen's trailer and the cul-de-sac at Cuss Road, but there's a metal post coming out of the ground 2.5 feet that he hit. That's what broke the light. Page 106 said that Teresa's colleague at the photo studio, Tom Pierce, said that Teresa had been in an abusive relationship. Kathleen has emails showing that Ryan was still interested in Teresa when she wasn't romantically into him any longer. She was also having sex with her roommate and Ryan's friend, Scott. Ryan committed perjury when he said Teresa and Scott were just friends. Kathleen's expert tried to interview Scott, but he refused. Kathleen's expert tried to Oh, I read that already. When he was told that Kathleen would be naming a suspect, Scott immediately blurted out, "You mean Ryan Hilgess?" Ryan also didn't like her nude photography business and that she was having sex with one of her clients. Teresa kept those pictures. The guy Teresa was having an affair with sent her a text at 12:45 p.m. on October 31. He admitted that to the police, but was never asked what it said or asked to show it. Bradley Check did have an alibi. Ryan called Check on November 3rd. Phone records show this is the first time they ever talked on the phone. Ryan lied to police about when the damage occurred to Teresa's car. Why would he lie if he was innocent? He claimed it happened months ago. He said she had filed an insurance claim too. Kathleen's investigator has found that Teresa never filed a claim. Ryan's cell records have big gaps during the times in question. On October 31, there was a huge block of time from 9:41 a.m. to 3:48 p.m. where his phone wasn't used at all. This is during the time Teresa would have been at the salvage yard. Teresa's day planner said she was going to get Sarah's stuff from her mom at 3 p.m. Then there was another gap in his phone records from 3:50 p.m. to 6:01 p.m. There are more gaps the days following Teresa's disappearance. Then on November 4th, from 4:15 to 7:25 p.m., he got 21 calls from an unidentified hidden number. It is during this time that Colburn called in Teresa's plates using his cell phone instead of the police radio. Then there's the whole he just happened to guess her login and password to her singular account. He called Teresa's phone at 6:42 p.m. on November 1st, and he said he got an automated message saying her box was full. He testified that the call lasted 4 seconds. But when Steven said he called and got that same message, his call lasted 13 seconds. Sometime between that call and Tom Pierce's call, the killer, Ryan, in this instance, deleted messages. Ryan had scratches on his left hand prior to the RAV4 being found on November 5th. One of Zellner's experts says they are consistent with scratches from fingernails. Zellner said burning the body is an obvious way to make sure he didn't leave any DNA on her body. Teresa's voicemail could hold 20 minutes of messages. When Stephen called her phone at 4:35 p.m. on October 31st, he got the automated message saying her box was full. When Pierce called her around noon on November 2nd, it was full. But in Fassbender's report, there were 5 minutes and 11 seconds of messages left between those two calls. So someone had to have deleted some calls. Scent tracking dogs gave trained alerts in the wooded area south of the Cuss Road cul-de-sac and between that and Stevens' trailer. Some dogs were trained to find decomposing bodies and others to find living people. The live dogs established that the RAV4 with Teresa inside was driven to that wooded area. The remains dog alerted at a suspected burial site near there. A shallow ditch was dug and a plastic tarp was discovered. Colborne persuaded everyone it wasn't a burial site. Other dogs took them through the Redont pit, traveling to the place where the RAV4 was discovered on Jambo Creek Road, where a witness said they saw it going into the Manitowoc County pits. Ryan knew they were going to conduct aerial surveillance on November 4th to search for the car. Kratz admitted that the car was not visible on this. The flyover ended at 6 p.m. on November 4th, and afterwards, Ryan drove the car to the southeast corner of the yard and was followed by a white Jeep using the Redont pit from Jambo Creek Road, and then only the Jeep returned. Ryan parked the car on a ridge between the pit and a pond. He parked it facing the opposite way all the other cars were parked. Then put tree branches, cardboard boxes, and a rusty car hood to explain why it wasn't seen in the flyover. Zellner says Ryan, to be clear, she always says the killer, but it's Ryan who she is referring to, went to the yard the night of the 4th with Colborne to look at for the RAV4. That's the night that Chuck saw headlights. Colborne did not have probable cause, so used Ryan as a civilian to do the search. Ryan quickly found the car, and Zellner claims you can hear Ryan saying, "It's hers," on the audio of when Colborne called dispatch using his personal cell phone to call in the plates. Ryan spearheaded the search party for Teresa. He lied about his name and claimed he was Ryan Kilgus to the police. He concealed his relationship to Teresa. He made maps for the volunteers to use on the search. He said he found a condom wrapper by the first house on Jumbo Creek Road. He told Pam Sturm of God where to search and supplied her with a camera and the direct line to MCSD in case she found anything. Pam was the only person to get those things. Even though Ryan and Teresa were no longer a couple, and when they were, it was abusive, Ryan moved immediately into Teresa's home. This gave him control over her belongings. He was there anytime police came to search. He told cops where they could get her dirty underwear, boxes for her phone and camera, as well as medical records. So it is reasonable to think he would have access to her subkey that he could have given to Colborne and Link to plant in Stephen's room. Ryan also personally searched the salvage yard multiple times. He did not log in when he went the second time, only logged out. So no one knows how long he was on the property. This gave him opportunity to plant the bones and electronic devices. At least one time he used his fake name. This would explain why the bones in the barrels weren't found until November 8th. Ryan was never asked for an alibi. He said the last time he saw her was on October 30th when he dropped something off at her house. He doesn't remember what he gave her or what time it was. He first told cops he was just a friend. Then they discovered he was her ex. Ryan testified that he was never treated like a suspect in any way. Ryan got 22 calls on November 4th from unknown numbers. Zellner assumes this was law enforcement working with him on the illegal search of the yard. Ryan testified that he didn't know how many times he talked to Sheriff Poggle on November 4th, but it was at least once. He doesn't know if he talked to Wiegert that day. Pam Sturm of God found the car among 400 cars on 40 acres in a half hour. No way, she was told where to go. Page 122 is a timeline of Teresa's calls on October 31st. Stephen called Auto Trader at 8:12 a.m. to schedule an appointment for Barb's van. Barb's husband told Tom Yonda had an Auto Trader account. The state never shared the call she got at 8:17 a.m. from Auto Trader that lasted 1 minute and 7 seconds. Then they called her back at 9:46 a.m., and that lasted 33 seconds. Stephen called Auto Trader at 11:04 a.m. from his landline. Stephen confirmed that someone was coming to take a picture of the Yonda van around 2 p.m. The state omitted this call from their timeline. Then another omitted call to Teresa by the state at 11:10 a.m. for 5 seconds. Teresa called Barb at 11:44 a.m. She got to the Schmitz's house at 1:10 p.m. Her cell records show she called them at 12:51 p.m., so she was there 20 minutes earlier than the state presented. She left there around 1:15 p.m. She looked for the zippers but couldn't find it. She left a message on their machine at 2:12 p.m. Teresa then went to the yard. Stephen called her at 2:24 p.m. to find out when she would be there, and he used *67 so she didn't have to return his call. Auto Trader called Teresa at 2:24 p.m. Dawn Pliska testified that Teresa called her at 2:27 p.m., but the phone records show it was the other way around, so her testimony is not credible. Teresa got to the yard between 2:31 and 2:35 p.m. She took a picture of the van and started walking towards Stephen's trailer, but he came out, so she went back to her car to get the magazine for him. He paid her and she gave him the magazine. She turned left on Highway 147 when she exited the salvage yard. Stephen called Teresa at 2:35 p.m. because after he flipped through the magazine, he realizes they also advertised loaders and he wanted to sell one. Stephen was calling to ask her to come back, but he ended the call before she answered because he wanted to go talk to Bobby, but Bobby wasn't home. The last voicemail Teresa got, allegedly, was at 2:41 p.m. She was on her way back to the Zipperers. On November 5th, Wiegert and Remacher had a conversation where they said that the Zipper's home was her last stop. Stephen called Teresa again at 4:35 p.m. to set up an appointment to sell the front loader. It went to automated voicemail. Jody called Stephen at 5:36 p.m. from jail. They talked for 15 minutes. Stephen had a bonfire around 7 p.m. for around 2 hours. Brendan joined him and they burned brush. Jody called him again at 8:57 p.m. and they spoke for another 15 minutes. Brendan went home before that call and the fire had already burned down to ash. On page 127, Redant told investigators he saw a fire on October 31st, but it was in a 55-gallon drum. When he was interviewed on November 10th, he was pushed to say the fire was large behind the garage in the burn pit. Law enforcement said in a report that Paul Metz said he heard a big whoosh that reminded him of starting a fire with gas on November 1st, and that he smelled a vile odor that was coming from the salvage yard. But his affidavit says it was on October 31st, and he heard a sound that reminded him of electrical wires surging around dusk. Then he smelled something like insulation burning. He never said anything about gasoline igniting or an odor. He is familiar with burning bodies as he is a volunteer firefighter. He does not know how that whoosh statement was attributed to him. Page 128 says scent dogs found a burial site 500 yards west of Stephen's trailer. There were numerous times between November 5 and 8 for the dog to discover the bones in the fire pit if they were there, as Stephen went to the family cabin in Crivets on the 5th. They searched around, but the dogs did not detect Teresa. A dog that can detect small sources from long distances was around 205 feet from where the car was later found, but didn't. Another dog didn't find anything on November 6th. Page 129 lists what the dogs did detect on the RAV4 after it was found. Hold on, need a drink. Several spent shell casings along the conveyor road at the southwestern edge of the yard. The burial site on Cuss. Several burn piles in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. Also in the brush and trees between Cuss and Stephen's trailer, as well as the berm on the west edge border by the salvage yard. The state didn't include those since they weren't on Avery property. Lenk, Colborne, and Sergeant Tyson performed the excavation of the burial site and reported there was nothing of value. But based on the dog's interest, it is probable that Teresa's body was there for a while before she was burned. Wilmer Siebert says he saw a call like Teresa's for into the Redant pit using the access road immediately south of his property. He saw a white Jeep following it. He remembers the paint was chipping off the hood. He said they were speeding when they drove down Jumbo Creek Road, entered east toward the gravel pits. He saw the Jeep come back out shortly afterwards, but not the other car. His daughter called Manitowoc County Dispatch to report it. The recording of this call has not been turned over to the defense. The dogs corroborated his observations on where the RAV4 drove. The state told the jury that you couldn't access the salvage yard property from the south, but the dogs show how you can. Teresa had called the Zippers when she was in their area and lost. She left a message on on their machine. When the Zippers were interviewed on November 3rd at 9:30 p.m., they told law enforcement about this message. Remacher listened to it and gave a copy to MCSD Detective Dennis Jacobs. That CD copy was never given to the defense and had allegedly disappeared. Zellner sent a FOIA request, and both counties claim they don't have it. Kratz never turned it over in discovery. Fallon confirmed in a letter on April 20, 2017, that neither county has been able to find it. Kratz never played the recording of the voicemail for the jury. It is reasonable to assume he concealed it, as it proves that the Zippers was Teresa's last stop. There is a recorded conversation with Remacher and Wiegert where they say that her first appointment was Schmidt's, then Avery, and then Zippers. Page 134 goes into the odometer reading on the RAV4. The odometer was noted, but not the amount of gas in the tank. That would tell you how far she traveled since she filled it on October 29th. The state didn't want the mileage because it would defute their claim that the yard was her last stop and not show she drove for miles afterwards. Page 135 says Wendy Baldwin and Sheriff Pago were in the air for around 4 hours during the flyover on November 4th, but the state only made 3 minutes of footage. Kratz saw the unedited footage and knew the RAV4 was not there at the time, so they intentionally edited it to conceal that. Redant told Zellner that he was told that they believed the car was driven to Cuss Road cul-de-sac by driving west through an empty field and then south down the gravel road past his hunting camp to an intersection with a gravel road that ran northeast into the yard. He believed the theory was based on the scent and tracking dogs, but investigators never wrote a report on their conversation with Redant telling him that. Kratz did not call him to testify. Zellner says that Redant has been unfairly targeted as a suspect just because he lived nearby. He has taken her to view his property twice and has a solid alibi. Page 136 starts the new evidence. First up, Kratz claimed Teresa was killed by 2 gunshot wounds to her head while she was laying on the garage floor. My husband is outside, so I know he's not watching this right now. And I don't know that I've ever thought of this until just this second, but would there be marks on the concrete of the garage floor if somebody was shot in the head? And that obviously would be at close range, I would think, if you're shooting somebody who's laying on your garage floor. I know this gun, this Glen Marfield rifle, is not very high power, and we've talked about that before. And my husband is like a gun expert. Let me just make this note real quick because I want to ask him. Gunshot garage floor. I just want to ask him because I'm curious now on that. Dr. Eisenberg said there were entrance wounds, but no exits. Zellner's expert says the bullet the state says went through Teresa's head never went through bone. He said that detectable bone fragments would be there if it was. Big Hair Colhane testified that she washed the bullet in a test tube filled with an agent. Her wash would not have removed the bone from the bullet. Zellner's expert says wood garments, it should be wood fragments. This is what you get for not having a real publisher and an editor to edit your book with all these typos. Um, Wood fragments appeared to be on the bullet, so it was fired into wood. There was also a red droplet on it. It could be paint. Stephen's trailer and garage are red. Stephen's landlord, Raleigh Johnson, who owned the 22 the state claims killed Teresa, said he often fired it near Stephen's garage at gopher holes. He did not pick any of the casings up. On page 145, she goes into the brain fingerprinting thing. I am not saying this can't be a real thing, but I just have zero interest in anything about that, so I am skipping that entire section. Sorry. That takes us to page 155, and Zellner's expert says that the swab the state said was used on the hood latch was not. Testing ruled out the DNA to be blood, saliva, semen, and urine. Sorry, Kratz, there's no such thing as sweat DNA. The DNA on the key is not blood, but the state claimed it was Stephen's skin cells. Zellner's expert said it was planted because the amount of DNA was 10 times greater than what Stephen left in a test where he held another key for 12 minutes. Stephen said he saw in police photos that his toothbrush was missing. The planted DNA could be from that. Page 162 begins the ethical violations by Ken Sweaty Kratz. He impaired Stephen's right to a fair trial. His press conference was professional misconduct. Charging Stephen based on Brendan's coerced confession is professional misconduct. His attempts to include Stephen's acts prior to 2007 was, say it with me, professional misconduct. Having separate trials for the guys, his request to aid and abet the instruction at Stephen's trial, his public dissemination of inflammatory information about Stephen, his jailhouse contacts with Stephen are all professional misconduct. Kratz held a press conference on March 2nd, where he first told kids to leave the room. Then he went into this disgusting story that I am not even going to repeat as it's utter bullshit and we all know it, so no need to repeat it. Page 166 says that Kratz knew the statements from Brendan were uncorroborated and coerced. He also knew of Brendan's IQ and that he was in special education, had problems and was an introvert. The police interrogated him multiple times without a parent or lawyer present. Brendan's confession was legally inadmissible against Stephen for constitutional and statutory reasons. Kratz had no evidence, so no legal basis to support these new charges of sexual assault and torture. Page 170 says Kratz's statements destroyed Stephen's due process for a fair trial. On June 15th, Sweaty moved to introduce prior accusations against Stephen that had nothing to do with this. Judge Willis sealed that motion. Sweaty charged Stephen with sexual assault just on Brendan's coerced confession, which he knew wasn't admissible. There was no proof Stephen sexually assaulted Teresa. So that's why Kratz wanted to go into Stephen's past. In Sweaty's summation, he said that there was no question who killed and mutilated Teresa, and all the evidence pointed to only one person. He said she was killed by 2 gunshot wounds to the head. He said no blood was found in the trailer, but since she wasn't killed there wouldn't be. Sweaty said that Teresa was killed in the garage. But, he tried Brendan for the same crime. But this time, Teresa was stabbed in the stomach and her throat was slit in the trailer where there wasn't any blood. Then he threw in the gunshots, but said she was killed in the trailer, not the garage. His two narratives contradict one another. It is unfair, legally and ethically, and undermines the very concept of justice and the duty of a prosecutor to serve truth. Page 176 says Kratz asked the judge to instruct the jury that they could find Stephen guilty of causing Teresa's death or aiding and abetting Brendan in causing her death. But then he and the judge agreed to take Brendan's name out and just say another. Another. Kratz knew that would link Stephen and Brendan before Brendan's court case. He was barred legally from using any evidence against Brendan to prove Stephen's guilt. So if this case rested on just Stephen's conduct and not anyone else, then that had nothing to do with this case. Kratz knew there was no proof relating to Brendan or his confession. Page 178 says Sweaty's book and media appearances just further destroy Stephen's ability at getting a fair trial. He tells stories of Stephen sexually assaulting his ex-wife, former girlfriend, niece, babysitter, the cat story, and more. Sweaty does have the right to free speech, but as an attorney, his rights are constrained by ethical rules. Kratz had tried to get some of this in at trial, but it was ruled inadmissible. Page 180 says that Kratz wrote to Stephen on January 14th, 2013, trying to get Stephen to meet with him to talk about his case. Sweaty told him he was in private practice now, and since Stephen was no longer represented by counsel, he wanted to meet with him for his own personal use. Stephen replied on June 18th, suggesting that Kratz could take his appeals since, quote, you know the case and you got Candy Avery, unquote, and that, quote, we can all get money together, unquote. I won't go into this, but in one of my conversations with Stephen, he explained that to me, and it makes perfect sense. But I won't talk about anything Stephen says to me pertaining to the case. All right, I can go into that at this point. Stephen was playing with Kratz. I've talked about this before. So if you've ever watched any of my other live videos, I have talked about this before. So Stephen was, Kratz was trying to manipulate Stephen, and Stephen was returning that manipulation. So he was, had the fish on the line and was trying to reel Kratz in. So that's why he was playing with him, as he knew that Kratz was all about trying to make money off this case. So Stephen was seeing what he could get out of Kratz. Okay. Sweaty wrote Stephen two more letters 2 years later. One on August 10, 2015, saying Stephen hasn't put him on his visitors list. He told Stephen to add me to his list. His last letter was September 6, 2015. He referred to a letter Stephen wrote him asking if they checked out the other fingerprints on the RAV4. So that is when Kratz wrote that stupid letter saying he thought Stephen was interested in being honest and so on, that I am not going to repeat because it just gets me mad. Page 183 goes into Sweaty's taking advantage of vulnerable women when he was a prosecutor. There were at least 10 women who complained about him. They started proceedings to remove him, so Kratz involuntarily resigned. He was found to have committed professional misconduct by violating the attorney's oath. He was suspended for 4 months from practicing law. The Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld the suspension. I am also not going into any of the ineffective counsel stuff. I understand why she's doing it. I think Strang and Buting did the best they could with what they had. They did not have the money she has. They did not have her experts. They did not have all the internet sleuths or making a murderer. So they did what they could. Things were missed. They are human. I'm reading comment that's on here and now trying to switch from my reading glasses to just try and see from here. Everything's blurry. So bear with me. It says, sadly, Stephen knew Kratz could exonerate him by coming clean about the dirty investigation. That never happened because Kratz has no morals. Here. That is everything from her brief. There are still the affidavits from her experts and then all the exhibits. I will try to go into those now. Since this is so long, I will make this one article and go into a separate one for that. But let me go into my thoughts on this. I have been following this case since I watched Making a Murderer the weekend it came out in December 2015. I have read all the documents, looked at exhibits, listened to the tapes. I have visited the salvage yard, walked the path of God, stood where Teresa took the picture of the van while being filmed from the bus stop. I drove through the quarry. I drove to the zippers and timed it from the yard. I have met most of the family. I have gone to see the lawyers talk about the case. I have talked on the phone to the lawyers, Brendan and Stevens. I've written articles on my experiences and done Facebook Live videos. I went to Brendan's appeal at the Seventh Circuit. I run the Free Brendan Facebook page and I own the Stephen Avery Project and Wrongfully Abused. I advocate for two other of Zellner's clients and I work with their families. I admin one of their Facebook groups, but I am not an expert. The only thing I am certain of is that Stephen and Brendan are innocent and their families were robbed of their loved ones, and it's taken a toll on all of their lives. I have complete faith in Zellner that she knows what she is doing far more than I would ever dream to know. I am not going to second guess her in any way, shape, or form. It's, in my opinion, as it has been from the start, that Ryan Hilgess is a killer. That's where I was at this time when I was writing that article. I'm not at Ryan Hilgess is the killer anymore, but that's where I was right here. I know there are so many theories out there, and yes, you can make many of them fit the pieces, but why overlook the obvious conclusion? Most murders are done by people who know the victim. If it turns out it wasn't Ryan, I won't be upset about it. I don't have some crazy need to be right. I just want the truth and those guys freed. I want Stephen to meet the woman of his dreams and get the love he has always wanted. I want him to spend his days working on cars or going fishing. I want Brendan to be reunited with his devoted mom, who has been the one constant in his life. His mom has always been there for him. I want him to be able to play video games all day, every day, eat all the hamburgers he wants. I hope both will be able to have their private lives and people will leave them alone to just be them. The thing we all need to take away from this horrible story is that hashtag we all live on Avery Road. No matter who you are or where you are from, if you are ever questioned by the police for any reason, do not speak to them without a lawyer. Enough of my rambling. I will move on to the other stuff to summarize and post this for now. I hope it's of some help. If you want to read the complete brief, you can find it on Zellner's website. You can find all the prior documents, exhibits, and just about anything you can imagine here. And that's a website, StephenAveryCase.org. It's been years since I've even thought of that. I don't even know if that's still up and if everything's still there. Next up is something titled Calumet County Sheriff 2017 Report, and it is dated July 22nd, 2018. Follow-up investigation regarding Teresa Halbach by Jax West from Stephen Avery Project. For whatever reason, law enforcement started looking into the Halbach case in late 2017. You can read the filings for yourself here, and there's a link. For those who don't want to go through the 62 pages, I will highlight the greatest hits here. The repeating officer is John Dietering, who is retired. He was involved in the case back in 2005, and they pulled him out of retirement for this. He interrogated 17 people. One other refused to talk to him. I will summarize each interrogation here for you. Sherman Williams from Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Dietering called him on 8/16/2017, 8/22, 8/23, and 9/19. He got a call back on 9/19 from someone from the paper. He was told that Jeff Phelps is who took the picture of Stephen and Brendan at the cabin in Crivets on 11/5/05. It was published later. He no longer works at the paper. Investigation continues. Ryan Hilgess. Dietering talked to him on the phone on 8/22. Ryan said he couldn't provide any details on Teresa losing her ignition key or the damage to the front turn signal on the RAV4. Investigation continues. Scott Blodorn. Dietering talked to Scott on the phone on 8/23. He also had nothing to say on the lost key or damage to the RAV4. Investigation continues. Andrea Vanderwall, Carrie M. Hoops, Jolene M. Bain, and Ben Mayer. These were all friends of Teresa. He asked about the key and the damage to the RAV4. He only talked to Jolene and Carrie, who also didn't know anything about either. Investigation continues. Thomas Pierce. Dietering talked to Thomas on the phone on 9/7. Thomas owned the photography studio Teresa worked at. He said he doesn't remember Teresa ever saying anything about damage to the RAV4. He doesn't remember anything about a fob other than it was on a long cord if she owned the vehicle. Thomas told the story of Teresa not wanting to photograph her friend's wedding due to Ryan Hilgast being there. Dietering met Thomas on 9/22 for follow-up questions. Thomas said Teresa would get phone calls she found disturbing. Thomas suspected they were from Ryan Hilgast. He said Teresa told him once that Ryan was abusive. He doesn't know if it was physical or verbal. Thomas talked again about the wedding photo shoot. He said the people were smoking pot during the shoot. Thomas never noticed any bruising or injuries on Teresa. He does not recall if he told Dietering or Wiegert back in November 2005 that Teresa had an abusive boyfriend. Thomas had given Teresa an emergency kit for Christmas to keep in her car, and he wonders where it was. He said Teresa planned to quit Auto Trader after Halloween and had been telling her clients this. This report ends saying that Thomas said he was diagnosed a month ago with Alzheimer's. His father died at 50 from it. He contributed episodes of it from the stress he was under due to his wife having an aneurysm and stroke. Investigation continues. Adrienne Walshinsky. Dietering talked to her on the phone on 9/7. Adrienne called him after she spoke to Carrie Hoops. She also didn't recall anything about damage to the RAV4 or a missing key. She just remembered her keeping her keys on a long lanyard and that was maybe black, but couldn't remember the color for sure. Investigation continues. Kelly Pitson. Dietering talked to her on the phone on 9/14. Kelly said the summer before Teresa died, she only had a key that opened her doors and not a remote. She doesn't know for sure if she replaced that, but knew she didn't have one on the summer of 2005. She saw Teresa last in either July or August 2005. Investigation continues. Kelly Pitson again. Dietering met Kelly at a restaurant on 9/20. She went over again that Teresa only had one key when they went on a road trip in either July or August. Kelly remembered physically having to unlock the doors with a key. That same key would start the car. She doesn't recall any damage to the front left turn signal of the RAV4. Dietering showed Kelly a picture of the damage. Then he showed her pictures of the key and lanyard that was planted in Stephen's room. She didn't recognize it, but said it was very similar to what she remembered. Kelly said during their road trip, Teresa lost her key, but it was found in the tent. Kelly then made a lanyard out of duct tape as a joke. Kelly said she last saw Teresa the weekend of 10/28/2005. Kelly said Teresa had told her once that some of the customers for Auto Trader creeped her out. Kelly said she had pictures somewhere of their road trip and would find them and let Dietering know. Investigation continues. Kelly Pitson, third time. Kelly left a message for Dietering on 9/21 saying she found two pictures from their road trip that occurred on 8/13/2005 and through 8/16/2005. She is sure of the dates as Teresa had journaled the trip and Kelly found the journal. She emailed Dietering the pictures and the journal page that was dated 8/14/2005. Investigation continues. Journal. The journal page said, note to selves. 1. Next time we go to, I can't read what this says, maybe Jill good test. Bring hula hoop and grass skirt. 2. Learn to chicken wing. What is that? 3. Always pack duct tape because a door doesn't open doesn't mean that you can't make a new door. Teresa. Keys are meant to be on keychains. Oh, that was number 4, sorry. 5. Hang out with hippies more often because they're nice. Investigation continues. Pictures. There were 2 pictures of the RAV4 and you couldn't see any damage to it. Investigation continues. Robert Femo. Dietering talked to a body shop estimator at a Toyota dealership on 9/21. He said it would be unlikely that it came out during a collision. The current cost to fix it would be $159.01 plus 1 cent labor. A recycled assembly would cost $50 and a $25 fee. He had no opinion on what would cause the damage. He said it wouldn't take much impact to do it. Investigation continues. Angie Colasso. Dietering called a Toyota dealership on 9/29 and spoke to Angie, the body shop manager. He gave her the VIN of Teresa's car and she said it did come with keyless entry. Investigation continues. Joshua Radant. Dietering brought along Special Prosecutor Mark Williams to Joshua's attorney Patrick DeWayne's office to question him on 10/4. Josh said he had been interviewed by a private detective over a year ago during the summer. Joshua thought the detective seemed pushy. Yeah, right? Where did Kelly find that journal? Lots of things, personal stuff of Teresa's people find, like her day planner. They asked Joshua about the fire he saw on 12/31/05. Wouldn't be 12/31, it would be 10/31. Typos. Joshua was driving from his gravel pit to his hunting cabin. The fire seemed to be on Avery property, and he assumed it was a 55-gallon drum. He said law enforcement talked to him at some point about it and stated the fire wasn't what Joshua thought. Joshua said the fire was not spread out or extremely high. Law enforcement questioned him a week after they talked to him the first time and told him they thought the RAV4 came west through a field and through the Cuss Road cul-de-sac. Joshua took it as theory, not a fact. Joshua said there was no access to the Avery property other than that. Joshua said it seemed to him that law enforcement wanted him to change his story about the fire. He doesn't recall telling anyone that the RAV4 was on his property before it came out in the media. Joshua saw searchlights in the Manitowoc County pit. Joshua said either Kathleen's team or media had mentioned pelvic bones. Law enforcement never told him about those. Investigation continues. Ashley M. Meagers, Chevalier. Dietering met Ashley at her home on 10/12. He wanted to know Brendan's girlfriend Emily's last name. Ashley said she didn't have a lot of contact with Brendan as she was in middle school then. She said she is related to Brendan through marriage. She never met Emily or know if she was even his girlfriend. Investigation continues. Kenneth Howen. Dietering talked to Kenneth on the phone on 10/12. Kenneth knew Teresa since high school. They were close in college. He lived with her for 6 months after the Peace Corps in February 2005. Teresa never mentioned an abusive relationship to him. He said they were very close, but not romantically involved. He met Ryan Hilgas 3 or 4 times and thought he was fine. He said Ryan was one of her earliest boyfriends. Kenneth said Teresa never said anything negative about Ryan. Kenneth didn't know about Teresa's key or if she had a remote to open the doors. He doesn't recall any damage to the RAV4. Investigation continues. Michael Halbach. Dietering got a phone call from Mike on 10/12. Mike said he was not able to find any video showing damage to the RAV4. He didn't remember the damage, but was hoping to find video to show it. Investigation continues. Anonymous voicemail message. Someone left Dietering a message on his work cell phone on 10/19 saying that Wilmer Siebert wanted Dietering to stop calling or coming to his house. Dietering had tried calling him on 10/11 and 10/12. If you don't recall who Wilmer is, you can read this article and then a link to an article in Rolling Stone. Investigation continues. Ryan Hilgess again. Dietering met Ryan at a restaurant on 10/23. Ryan had looked at his cell records to establish his timeline of the week 10/31/05 to 11/5/05, but said too much time had passed for him to recall anything with any certainty. He said he and Scott Blodorn were handing out search of assignments on 11/5/05. Pam Sturm was late, and she specifically asked to search the Avery property. This is what I don't get. They have talked about knowing this was one of the last places Teresa was seen. So why wasn't it one of the first places assigned to search? Did they arrange with Pam that she would get it no matter how late she was? It just doesn't make sense. Ryan said he may have gone on a search in late afternoon, but doesn't remember where. He doesn't remember when he learned the RAV4 was found on Avery property. Ryan said he had been on Avery property on 11/7/05 as part of the search team. He thinks he was in the area across Highway 147. He said he and Scott Blodorn were brought to a restricted area and were shown maps of areas searched. He said he was always with law enforcement. He claimed he was not allowed to roam freely. Ryan doesn't know where he got the information about the damage to the RAV4 and told Fossbender about it. Ryan said he never used the name Kilgus to sign into the property, but that people interpret Hilgus to Kilgus all the time. Ryan said he didn't have scratches on his hand and claimed that they were writings that he says you can see in video from the next day that they were gone. He dated Teresa for 5 years. They broke up due to distance. He said they remained close friends and she never said anything about abuse. He said he never lived in Teresa's home but did stay with Scott for several days after Teresa disappeared. Investigation continues. Lisa Fox, Fochs. Dietering got a call back from Lisa on 10/24. She said she and Teresa were close in high school, but drifted apart in college. They began to renew their friendship a year prior to Teresa's death. She had no information on the key or the damage to the RAV4. Brian Dassey. Dietering brought Eric Volan from Calumet County Sheriff's Department to talk to Brian at his home on 11/3. Brian didn't want to talk to them because he knows cops are shady, and he didn't think he had anything of interest to say to them. Brian said his affidavit was accurate and he was not pushed to say anything. He recalls Bobby telling him that he saw Teresa driving away from the Avery property sometime during the week of 10/31/05 to 11/6/05. They asked Brian about his normal day. Brian didn't stay at Barb's much. He would shower and maybe eat there. He didn't like being there because he doesn't like Scott Taddock. He also didn't like his mom being with Scott while she was married to Tom Yonda. Brian said he was sure Bobby told him he saw Teresa leave. Dietering claims Bobby at one point said if he did it, he should stay in prison, and if not, someone is still out there who needs to answer for this. Brian could not recall if he was at his mom's on Halloween. He has no idea where the computer was in the house or how many there were. He does recall a laptop computer. He was not at a bonfire on 10/31/05. He doesn't recall seeing a fire that day. Dietering said that Brian previously said Stephen seemed off up in Crivets 11/4/05 to 11/6/05. And Brian said it was not unusual for Stephen to be odd, and he attributed it to being incarcerated for something he didn't do. Brian has no memory of saying Stephen freaked out when he heard cops were coming to the cabin. Investigation continues. And I want to pause there. So, and everything that I tell you guys are things I've said before, but I know we have new people who watch this stuff. So sorry for the people who have to hear these stories over and over again. But so when I was a moderator for Barb's Brendan page, and so when I was friends with Barb and Scott and all the bad people that I know now are bad people, and at the time did not. Um, I did a live video at Scott and Barb's house, and so I was interviewing Scott, Barb, and Pete Dassey, Brendan's father. Brian Dassey showed up there at one point with one of his kids. I don't even know how many kids he has or anything, but he showed up with a kid. And so I talked to him for a very short time. I found him to be a very nice guy. Um, he did not seem to be like the rest of the family. But again, I only met him for a very short time. Um, so these are just quick opinions. Um, he seems to really not want to have much to do with his own family because his eyes are open to what his family is and who they are. I don't like when people say, blood is thicker than water, whatever, and you should always, stand by your family. No, you shouldn't. Because if your family is a horrible person, you should not be defending and protecting bad people just because you're blood related. Um, this whole case caused a lot of stress on Brian, and he wants nothing to do with it. That he had even considered changing his last name to protect his family, his wife, his children. Um, he told me that the cops tried to manipulate everybody to say they saw a fire and that it was large. When I talked to Scott that day too, Scott told me that he was manipulated into saying the fire was bigger. And so it is just clear that they had their narrative, their their round hole, and they were trying to make the square pegs fit. You know what I mean? Um, so Brian, though, while many of the Avery clan have the low IQ and can be manipulated, not everybody is like that. And so Brian isn't like that. And so they weren't able to manipulate him into saying what they wanted him to say. But Brian stands by that Bobby told, or that Bobby was seen driving the RAV4. Blaine saw Bobby driving it. Yeah. Okay. So now we go into Scott Tadek and Barbara Yanda Tadek. Okay, get ready. I am not going to be able to contain myself while going through this stuff. I will keep my comments to after I recap Dietering's report. Dietering brought along Jeff Wish from the Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation to meet Scott at Subway on 11/10. Scott said he wasn't involved in or killed Teresa. Scott said he visited his mom on 10/31/05 in Green Bay because she had back surgery. He didn't know if it was late or early morning. He got back to his trailer between 2:30 and 3:30 to change clothes and go hunting. Then he said he thinks he saw his mom mid-morning. After hunting, he changed clothes and picked up Barbara. They went back to Green Bay to visit his mom. He said it took 25 to 30 minutes to get there. His trailer is no longer there as the owner sold it. Scott said he saw Bobby Dassey when he was going hunting. Scott said his mom is still alive. Dietering knew about the phone call between Scott, Barb, and Stephen on 10/24/2017, and Stephen saying that Scott hit his own mom. Scott said he has no idea where Stephen got that, and it, quote, Pisses me the fuck off, unquote. Scott said he knew Stephen around 2 years prior to 10/31/05. He had not been dating Barbara very long then. Scott said he didn't have much contact with Stephen in prison. He would call Barb, but not much. Scott said since that call was made public, he was getting threats on Facebook Messenger and text messenger by random people. Scott said he lost his temper during the call and doesn't remember what he said. Scott said he wasn't at Barb's very often prior to 10/31/05 because her husband Tom Yonda lived there. Go figure. Scott said his relationship with Barb was kind of hidden. He barely knew her kids then. Scott said he got along good with Brian at first, but the relationship turned after Brian started talking to Kathleen Zellner. Scott doesn't think Brian told the truth and said he was an edgy person. Scott said Brian once threw him off his property when Scott made comments about some electrical work Brian was doing. Scott said he gets along with Bobby Dassey. He gets along with Blaine Dassey when they're all together. He thinks Blaine has taken Brian's side now. Scott said Barb only talks to Bobby and no longer speaks to Brian or Blaine. Scott said it's difficult since Barb, Brian, and Blaine all work together. Scott said they visit Brendan weekly, sometimes twice a week. No, they don't. He doesn't believe Brendan is involved in Teresa's murder, but said, Stephen, that's a different story. Scott claimed that Stephen controlled and ruined the Avery family the 2 years he was out of prison. Scott doesn't think Chuck and Earl Avery are involved. Well, my little magnet thing came off. Have you ever seen these glasses where you can get different frames to have cool different things on there? Dietering asked Scott if Barb was inside or outside her trailer when he picked her up, since he has said both in different statements. Scott said he doesn't remember. He does remember when he brought Barb back, the fire was very big. He saw Stephen with another person he assumes was Brendan. He didn't know the boys all that well back then. Scott said he didn't know Ryan Hilgas or Scott Blodorn. Scott doesn't recall ever talking to Bobby about what he saw on 10/31/05. He doesn't know if Barb has either. Scott said he wouldn't say anything to minimize Stephen's involvement. He said Stephen had told law enforcement when they started to look at Scott. Scott said he wouldn't minimize Barbara's involvement. He said he didn't believe he minimized Brendan's. He said he doesn't believe the text message he got from Kevin Romlow, who says that he contacted Scott to tell him he saw the RAV4 by the dam on 11/4. Scott called Barbara and had her meet them at the restaurant. Barbara said she has talked to Stephen maybe 8 times since he was incarcerated. She used to visit him, but was taken off his list. She claims she's back on it now. She said she doesn't know who killed Teresa. She doesn't remember if she had AOL back then. They had a computer that was in one of the boys' rooms. She said she thought it was Bobby and Brendan's room. She said it was also in the living room at one time. She didn't know if it had a password. She claimed that Tom Yonda used it all the time. She claimed she never locked her house. She said she still had the computer and they could come and take it. Barb says she doesn't know if Stephen went into the trailer while she was at work. She claimed he just walked in a couple times each week. She thinks Jody Stokowski went in because she noticed liquor missing. Barb said she only talked to Brad Dassey about the computer because she wanted it to work faster because it was running slow. She thinks the conversation took place way before 10/31/05. She remembers Brad asking her if it had a password. She doesn't recall it having any porn on it. She then claimed that Tom Yonda looked at porn, but she never actually saw him looking at it. She said Tom moved out on 10/15/05, but knew her doors were unlocked. She would visit her parents after they were separated. He would go to Crivets with them too. Her parents did not and still don't like Scott. And the times that I visited Dolores, yeah, she told me how much she did not like Scott Paddock. She didn't particularly like Barb either, for that matter. Barb claimed to not know anything about the files on the computer that said Teresa Halbach and DNA. She had no idea who created them. She denied seeing the page that showed Stephen and Teresa together. Barb said anyone who came into her trailer had access to the computer. She wasn't sure how much Bobby was on the internet because he worked third shift. Barb thought they got the computer between 2002 and 2004. She has no memory of having AOL dial up. She remembered the kids had cards to give them credits for SMS messages. She doesn't remember if she stayed the night at Scott's on 10/31/05, but did spend a lot of nights there. She recalled getting back from the hospital around 8 p.m. and then driving to Scott's to watch Prison Break. Barb said she doesn't know why Stephen is now blaming everyone. She said he just wants out. She didn't think Stephen was involved in Teresa's murder, but had no idea who might be involved. She didn't believe Scott was involved as she was with him all day. She said Brendan is innocent. Barb doesn't know how many times Kathleen Zellner has been to the Avery property, and Scott indicated it is pretty hush hush. Barb wanted to talk to Zellner about Kevin Romlow. She said she was also asked to give Zellner the phone number of the parents of Carmen Bootwell, who allegedly died of an overdose. Barb said Carmen was cremated and her parents had to wait a month for the cremains. Scott said he was willing to give Zellner their number, and the family was willing to give the cremains to Kenner to test against ashes that had been recovered. Barb said she gave the information to her brother Chuck, but he did not pass it on to Zellner. Barb said she never intended to kick Zellner off of Avery property, but when her team heard her and Scott were coming, they left. Barb and Scott guessed the team had between 5 and 8 cars. Scott said Stephen has the family controlled, quote, really bad, unquote. Barb said she doesn't know why Zellner is pointing at Scott and Bobby. She said she never gave Zellner any evidence. Barb said she has never heard anything over the last 12 years to make her think Stephen was guilty, but the conversation he had with Bobby and Mike Osmondson about helping to hide or move a body. Barb said she left a message for Zellner on 10/24/17, but she doesn't remember what she said, but it was an angry message. Barb said she and Scott bought a house in 2007. At one point, Wiegert and Fassbender told her it might be in her and Scott's best interest to move away. She said Scott didn't get along with her parents, so to make things better, she moved out. Dietering asked why her family didn't talk to her for 4 years. She said it was a little bit of everything. Barb said the trials put a lot of stress on her family. He asked why. Stephen seems to control her family. Barb said 3/4 of the time she doesn't listen to what Stephen has to say. Scott said Stephen has always been a controlling individual, even before the first time he went to prison. Barb said Stephen and Earl are tied for her favorites in her parents' eyes. Scott said even though Stephen is in prison, his parents are still buying him property to live on when he gets out. Barb said at one time she was very angry with Stephen. Barb does remember a fire on 10/31/05. She doesn't know if it was dark or light out when she saw it. She does remember when she got back around 8 to 8:15 p.m. that she saw Stephen and Brendan by the fire. She remembers Brendan was home when she got back from work between 4:50 and 5 p.m. She thinks all her boys were home. Bobby was laying down. Blaine was getting ready to go trick-or-treating, and Brendan was playing video games. When she got home at 8 p.m., she said Bobby was sleeping and Brendan was outside with Stephen. She called Stephen's cell and talked to Brendan to make sure he had a coat on. He didn't, so he went home and got one of Barb's. She told him to be home between 9 and 10. Barb gave Wish the tower for the computer on 11/10. They were going to do additional forensic examinations. Investigation continues. Now we're on Jack's soapbox. I'm so thirsty. Now I am going to go back over their statement just to bitch about it. Scott and his mom are not close. Scott was physically abusive towards her. It makes no sense why he would go visit her in the morning when he knew he was going with Barb that night. Poor Scotty whined about getting threats after he had threatened Stephen on a recorded call. Aren't we all sad for him? I have heard him threaten many people, Brendan included. Poor Scotty. Scott had an affair with his cousin's wife. It seems Barb's family all liked Tom Yonda. She would abandon her high school age children to go sleep with Scott. How mother of the year of her. Scott called Brian an edgy person. It's I met Brian. I have met several of the Avery, Dassey, Chase clans. Brian seems the most normal out of them all. When I met him, Scott was also there. I didn't see any interaction between the two of them. It was no secret that Scott only got along with Bobby out of all of Barb's sons. I'd been told that Scott had physically beat up both Brian and Blaine and kicked them out of the house. Blaine and his wife are the ones who originally started the closed Facebook group for Brendan that Barb and her pathetic Dassey Nation currently runs. Blaine truly cares about his brother. Scott claims they visit Brendan weekly and sometimes more. No, they don't. Barb has always gone to visit him. Scott didn't until Making a Murderer came out. Scott doesn't like Brendan one bit and does not want him home. He has made that perfectly clear. No shock that he would try to point the finger at Stephen, since Stephen rightfully points his at Scott. Scott is desperate to keep both Stephen and Brendan in prison for this crime. How could Scott not recall if he and Bobby ever talked about the case? That's a bunch of bullshit. Even if they are innocent, they're not. Of course they would talk about it. That's natural. Of course he would say he didn't believe the text from Kevin saying he saw the RAV4 and would just ignore it. He knows he and Bobby put it there. If you were innocent and cared about Brendan, if no one else, you would report the text because what harm does it cause to pass it on? I found it very interesting that Barb claims to only have talked to Stephen 8 times over the 12 years he has been in prison. That speaks volumes to me. She really needs to stop with the I don't know if I had internet bullshit. She contradicts herself in the same paragraph. She knows she had it. Law enforcement knows she had it. It's pathetic and only makes her look more guilty. And why the fuck would she keep that tower all these 12 years? It's not like you would use it now. So why does she still have it? What an idiot. Blaming Tom Yonda for the porn is another lame attempt and just makes her look guiltier. Her sons all said the house was always locked when not home. Her sons all said there was a password on the computer. It makes no sense for Tom to go there when he no longer lives there to look at porn. Just like it makes no sense when Carla tries to say it could have been Stephen. Why would Stephen leave his trailer he was living in alone, since Jody was in jail, to go look at porn on their computer when he had his own? Bobby would be home sleeping. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Nice try to blame Jody for coming in too and stealing liquor. Jody is a complete imbecile, but come on, how desperate can you be? Brad came forward back in 2005 to say that Barb asked about reformatting the computer. He had nothing to gain by doing that, nor does he now. I believe Brad completely on this. I find it very telling that Barb has never spoken to Zellner, yet she makes herself available for law enforcement who put her family in prison. Why wouldn't you help the only person that can free Brendan? Maybe she doesn't really want Brendan home? She claims Scott dropped her off at 8 p.m. She talked to Brendan, then drove to Scott's. She said they watched Prison Break. Did they record it? I don't recall what time it was on then, but it would be either 7 or 8 p.m. So either way, they would not be able to watch the whole thing. Did she just want to watch the last half hour of it? If that show was obviously something she and Scott wanted to watch, then wouldn't they have been back in time to watch from the start? How can she say she was with Scott all day? She was at work until 5 p.m. She has no idea what Scott was up to. Now we get into Carmen Bootwell. And then I have a picture of an article. Oh my God. All right, we're going to be coming to a stop soon. All right, so after you look at the picture of Carmen Bootwell, doesn't she resemble Teresa Halbach? They were distant relatives. The theory is that the bones recovered at Stevens were Carmen's. Barb and Scott talked about Zellner wanting Carmen's parents' number. Why did Barb and Scott move? They had both told me that Wiegert and Fassbender made them. It never made any sense to me and how they could be made to move. Then they bitched that Chuck bought the trailer from them and ripped them off. They had claimed bankruptcy at that time, yet were also able to buy another house. It all doesn't add up. Barb has never gotten along with her parents. It was made worse by her being with Scott, who no one likes. Then add to that the times Barb has told the press that Stephen is guilty. Barb also hates Carla, and Carla hates her. Carla, at one point, abandoned her family when she was having an affair with a man who lived out of state. One of Carla's daughters then went and lived with Barb because her dad couldn't handle her. Those two women constantly talk about each other. Scott hates Carla's husband, and he hates him back. Scott also threatened to kill Carla many times in my presence. Carla would talk about getting one of Scott's cigarette butts to test his DNA since he has always refused to willingly give some. It's a very unhealthy family environment. I thought it was funny that Scott would whine about the parents buying land for Stephen for when he gets out when Scott has a house and a vacation house. Freedom. It's none of his business what Alan and Dolores spend their money on. They love their son, unlike other moms I know. Barb claims she knew Bobby was laying down when she got home from work. Did Scotty say he was sleeping after hunting? Bottom line, Barb and Scott are lying. They have been lying this whole time. If you are a supporter of Stephen and Brendan's, then you should not be supporting these people who keep lying and are part of the reason two innocent men are in prison. Now back to the report. Aurora Bay Care Center. Dietering called the place Scott's mom was for her surgery and was told they do not have any video from back then because their hard drive overrides existing video every couple of months. Investigation continues. Bobby Dassey again. Dietering and Wish interviewed Bobby at his home on 11/17. Bobby said he was hunting by Scott's trailer that day in 2005. He said he was in a deer stand. He said he saw Scott on his way there on Highway 147 by Jumbo Creek Road, the opposite direction from where his cell phone was. He said he saw Scott around 3 p.m. He said he didn't know Teresa was coming that day and had never met her. He woke up on 10/31/05 to go deer hunting. He looked out the window and saw Teresa taking pictures of his mom's van. She was alone. He took a shower, looked out again, and she was walking towards Stephen's trailer. He never saw Stephen. He went to his vehicle and didn't see her or anyone else. Her car was still there. He didn't see her leave and never saw her again. He didn't see anyone when he got home from hunting. When he left to go to work that night, he saw a fire at Stevens. He said Teresa's car was gone when he got back from hunting at 5:30 p.m. Barb said he was sleeping when she was there at 5, but he says he wasn't home until 5:30. Bobby said he never talked to Brian about this. He has no idea why Brian would say that he had told him back then that he saw Teresa leave. Bobby did talk to his mom about seeing someone take pictures of her van and asked why she would try to sell it because it was junk. Bobby doesn't recall if he ever used the internet and said if he did, it wasn't often. He doesn't remember if they even had internet. but then says everyone was on the computer and said Blaine and Brendan were the main users. He said he thought it was on a desk in the living room. He said he didn't know if he ever watched porn. Then he said 5 guys lived there, so it could have been anyone. Bobby gave the same excuse Barb did, that he didn't use it much because he worked the third shift. Bobby said the computer was never in his room. He said his room was too small. He said he thought he shared a room with Brian. Bobby said he got along with Tom Yonda and didn't get along with Scott at the time. He thought Tom moved out in September. He said Scott didn't come over often and that Barb was always at his trailer. He didn't know if Stephen had internet and said he wasn't there often. Bobby knew how to create folders on a computer but didn't know who made the Teresa, Hallbach, and DNA folders. Bobby claimed to not know the Verdant property that was next to the salvage yard. Bobby said he never hunted there or in the gravel pit. He said he didn't know Ryan Hilgas or Scott Blodorn. He doesn't know why Stephen would single him out, but thinks it's because he testified at his trial. Bobby said he didn't make anything up at trial and had no reason to lie. He sometimes thinks Stephen did it and sometimes not. Bobby denied having any involvement in Teresa's murder. Bobby talked about Stephen and Michael Osmondson talking about hiding a body. He said Stephen laughed after making the statement. He learned Teresa was missing that evening. Bobby also claimed a deer that was hit by a car that same day, 11/4/05. Bobby wasn't sure if Jody was ever at their house. Then he said the body conversation with Stephen happened the day Teresa was reported missing, not the day she was actually missing. Bobby didn't notice anything out of the ordinary with any family members after 10/31/05. He thinks he would be able to tell if they had been involved in a murder. He claims to have never watched Making a Murderer, but did watch the Dr. Phil episode. Bobby said, quote, "How many people can you blame it on before you run out of people?" Unquote. Dietering took that to mean Zellner. Bobby said he does visit Brendan, but not as much as he would like to. He did not believe Brendan was involved from day one. He said the investigators got in Brendan's head. Investigation continues. I'm just seeing where's a good stopping point, if that's the good stopping point. Okay, I see where I'm going to stop. Greg Shetter. Dietering got an email of Lenk and Colborn's work schedules for November 2005 from Inspector Greg Shetter. Investigation continues. Scott Toddick again. Dietering called Scott back as he had left a voicemail on 12/24. Scott whined about death threats he was getting on Facebook. Dietering told him to contact MCSD. Scott also wanted to know when they could get the computer back. Investigation continues. Review of reports concerning Teresa Hallbach activity at Avery Salvage Yard. Dietering reviewed DCO reports on 12/28. Teresa was at Avery Salvage to photograph cars on 6/20, 8/22, 8/20, 9/19, and 10/10. She collected payment in cash from Stephen. Investigation continues. Receipt of records from MCSD. Dietering had requested on 1/4/2018 incidents that had occurred within 1 mile of Avery Salvage Yard from 10/1/05 to 11/6/05. Well, thank you for having my book. And yeah, this gets me all angry again, too. And I'm pretty sure once I get done reading this, I'll be writing, since this is from 2022 and a lot's happened since then. So I think I'll be continuing it because this will just get me going. Review of reports concerning Teresa Hallbach activity. Oh, I read that already. Okay, I'm reading the receipts. That's where I'm at. 10/22, fire. 10/28, theft. 11/3, assist other agencies. 11/3, murder, non-negligent. 11/4, accident, deer. 11/5, assist other agencies. Investigation continues. Larry Ledvina. Dietering got an email on 1/4/2018 from a deputy inspector from MCSD about the incidents 1 mile from the salvage yard. Investigation continues. Larry Ledvina again. Dietering got an email from Larry on 118 from Dietering's request to locate any visitor records or recordings of Jody from 11/11/05, which would confirm that Stephen had visited her. No records remained on file from that time. Investigation continues. Scott Blodorn again. Dietering talked to Scott at a coffee shop on 1:30. Scott believed he was home 10/31/05. He would stay home to watch Packers games. He doesn't know if Teresa was there the night before. He didn't recall any damage to the RAV4. He didn't recall anything about the key fob. He said Teresa was very organized. They didn't discuss her day-to-day activities. Investigation continues. Barb Taddock again. Dietering returned a voicemail from Barb on 2/28. She wanted to know when she was getting her computer back. Dietering didn't know. He told her he would find out. This time, Barb said that Blaine and Brendan shared a room. Bobby had a room to himself, and Brian was in the basement. Investigation continues. Return of computer. Dietering and Wish returned the computer to Scott Taddock on 4/5 at his house. Investigation continues. That is the end of the reports. So what do you think? Where do you stand now on Scott, Barb, and Bobby? And that's where I'm going to end today. When we pick up, it is going to be oral arguments at the Seventh Circuit of Appeal here in Chicago. So this is where we are in the book, how much we've got. This is what we've got left to go. So we are getting there, and we're over an hour and a half now on this. So that's where we are on the book. I gave you an update at the very beginning of this of talking to Stephen. If anything develops from that, I will do a video to tell you what's going on there. And of course, if anything new ever pops up, I'll go live when I can. Since this is Justice with Jax, also, if anything happens in Melissa's case, who I'm going to visit Melissa Kaluzinski in prison tomorrow, and Marnie has court at the end of June. I run the. Am I starting to peel already? I got sunburned yesterday. Another reason why I'm in a tube top today. One of the ballistic experts in the Marnie Yang case wrote a summary of her case just in these last couple days. And I'm going to be posting that on Marnie's website. I just haven't gotten around to it, but that's freemarnieyang.com. Okay, so that is everything. If you have anything to report on Stephen's case, always reach out to Kathleen Zellner. She's got her website, KathleenTZellner.com. And then there's a tab for the Stephen Avery case. And so then there's a direct line there on how you can call for tips or an email. She also represents Melissa Kaluzinski. So if there's anybody out there that knows anything on Melissa's case, you could also reach out to Kathleen on that. So, all right, I am going now to enjoy the rest of this day. It's going to be nice here in Chicagoland. So if I can get my mouse to work. So I guess not. I can't get the mouse to work to actually end this video. So thank you, everybody who joined me today. Thank you for those who will be joining us later. And I will post a link to this on the Stephen Avery Project page on Facebook. All right. Until next time, investigation continues.